All right, recording in progress. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We are really excited to have you here at the first community college community conversation. So what I'll do is go through just a couple of slides. If you are hanging out with us for the very first time, the Community College Project was born at Stanford University last year, where we taught a class called Designing Black and Brown Spaces. And it was a class that basically was created to create a psychologically safe space for us to process George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and some of the things that happened during the year that was 2020. And we thought it would be interesting for us to leverage the Zoom technology to invite not only Stanford students, but also the broader community. So we actually had a number of Stanford students sign up, and then more than 750 people from all over the world actually signed up to audit that class last year. So we wanted to bring that concept of inside, outside, back, and provide an avenue for not only the Stanford students, but also kind of the general public who are interested in our topic this time around, which is designing world peace, where peace stands for policy, ethics, AI and ML technology, culture, and the environment. We're going to talk about those things in the next series of talks over the next 10 weeks or so. So again, welcome to Community College. Community for a lot of Black and Brown folks means a lot. You know, you were raised in a community, you picked up the culture from your community. And then on the other side of that, college education was probably prescribed as a way for you to get to a better outcome than maybe your parents or their grandparents or great grandparents. So we're reclaiming the term community college and saying, hey, you know, maybe that's not just a stepping stone to get to an Ivy League institution or to get to something better. But it's a powerful concept when you think about putting community college together and looking at it from that vantage point. So again, welcome to the space. We're really, really excited to have you. And on behalf of the whole team here, we're looking forward to the discussion that we'll have today. So let me move forward and just call out a couple of folks in the community, some that might be in the room right now and some not. We've got a thriving Instagram community. And we ask people, you know, why did you want to join, or tell us a little bit about yourself as we build up to this first set of talks here. And these are some of the things that you all have called out and let us know about you. So just want to shout out Mariah and Megan and Jim and Coloma and Brent and just say thank you for engaging in this way, sharing a little bit more about yourself. And yeah, again, for any of y'all who feel like engaging with us in this way over social media or any other means, feel free to. This is your space just as much as it is ours. All right. So again, welcome to Community College, Designing World Peace. We asked ourselves the question for this time around: how do we make space for Black and Brown genius, expertise, and creativity? So that's the guiding question that we're looking to answer over these series of talks. And this is a look at the team behind last year's community college and some behind this year's community college. Brandon Middleton is my name, Ariam Mogos, Pia Bocanegra up on the video there, Adrian Octavius Walker, bottom left, Nari Gathers, and Marv Lahins is the core team that continues to do this work on the Stanford D School side. And with that, we'll say it's really nice to meet you for the folks that chimed in over chat. And then we want to tee up our two special guests for today, both Diya Wynn and Todd Escalona. So I'm actually going to pass the popcorn over to Diya Wynn to introduce herself. Feel free to take 2-3 minutes to say hello to the people, you know, a little bit about yourself, a little bit about what you're up to, and then we'll pass the popcorn over to Todd to do the same, and then we'll jump into some conversation today.
Sure. Thank you, Brandon, and greetings and good afternoon, and I guess good morning for that individual that was in Kuala Lumpur who is in 7 o'clock in the morning. Greetings to everyone. I'm excited to be here and to join in this conversation with Brandon and with Todd about designing world peace. And I think that's powerful all by itself. First, in establishing or acknowledging that there is a gap there, that there's actually something that we need to do, something we need to address. And isn't it great to be able to come into an educational environment like this and have these sorts of conversations or these discussions? I would say that this needs to happen a whole lot more, and particularly in my area of work where I study and have a passion in AI ethics, responsible AI or trustworthy AI, depending on how you might refer to it. In the way of an introduction, I'll tell you a quick story, and I'll try to make this in a couple of minutes here. But when moving into AI ethics for me, these last couple of years was really a career pivot in some ways, because I started on this journey about wanting to make sure that I was preparing my sons. I have 2 boys, and preparing them for the future. And I wasn't confident that what they were getting in school, and in fact, I'm probably pretty certain that what they were getting in school wasn't really going to prepare them for what they needed. So I wanted to understand what skills, what information, what subjects did we need to expose them to in order for them to be better equipped for the future. And so that led me into looking at and understanding a lot more about automation, data, and artificial intelligence. And the interesting thing I uncovered is it wasn't just a concern with these technologies affecting the workforce and changing how we would operate in the future, but they really were affecting populations, and in particular, Black and Brown people or other individuals or marginalized communities that were being left out of the picture. So if we fast forward, it's great to be able to take my skill, my background in computer science and mathematics, and working in cloud technologies and working with startups and companies, and even in diversity and inclusion, to start to look at and bring that to bear with AI ethics in this work. And so I'm excited to have this conversation. As you see, it's very much a passion for me. And it started off really about, how do I make a difference for my family, but also make a difference for those that we engage and encounter, and hopefully the generations to come. So that's it. I'll share a ton of more, but I'll pass it over to Todd now for an introduction as well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Diya. Todd, over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Diya, and a special shout out to everyone who's joined here today. Thanks so much for being a part of this community. It's an honor for me to be able to contribute some thought here. So my name is Todd Escalona, and I'm a technologist at heart. I have several interests all across the board, ranging from blockchain to cryptos to NFTs, all the cool hot stuff right now, and certainly enjoy working with AI ML. I've spent my entire career working with very large enterprises and all the way down to the smallest of startups. So the types of conversations that I usually have, they range, as you can imagine, from being with very mature data scientist teams all the way down to non-technical co-founders of companies. So with that being said, I am also a previous founder of a cloud consulting company, which provided advisory services just on general cloud service consumption, as well as infusing machine learning into their business. I've worked in the open source world as well, and I've made some contributions to the PyTorch deep learning framework, if you're familiar with that from a machine learning practitioner perspective. I've also helped one of the largest cloud providers build out their platform to offer a reinforcement learning service in order to enable aspiring machine learning developers all across the world from all different backgrounds, all industries. So I'm very excited to be here again, and again, to contribute some of the thoughts for today's dialogue.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Todd. And Todd didn't say he was a Chicagoan, just like me and my my family. So
I was supposed to say that I was from New York then too, right? Because we got to represent.
So we can have pizza wars probably after this, deep dish versus New York style. But yeah, it's good to get the overview and the background and the context from both of you all's introduction. So what I wanted to do maybe with the first question, I kick it to you, Diya. There are people who might have some kind of context for AI and ML technology and ethics, And then there's some people who might come to this brand new. So in terms of that pillar of world peace that we talked about, could you maybe provide a primer or like a framework for people to think about the work that you do? And out of this conversation, hopefully you leave this with 100 level understanding of maybe some questions to ask, some considerations that you'll be able to take with you for yourself and for your family and for your community. So paint a picture for us, Diya, for some of the folks that might not be so familiar with the field and the space.
Sure. I guess, I'll start off with just, I guess the first thing is really just making a little bit of a distinction, because we talk about artificial intelligence and you'll hear machine learning and some other terms. And I guess to start off with, and hopefully you all have this context, and I'm sure that Todd probably could offer a lot here too. But when we think about artificial intelligence, we're talking about broadly machines or building systems that can begin to think and behave like humans. And then machine learning being a subset of that, where they're really learning from and leveraging algorithms and data in order to find patterns and make decisions and inferences based on those patterns. And when we start to think about this in the context of ethics or trustworthy AI or responsible AI, it's really understanding, what are the implications or the concerns that we need to think about and observe and pay attention to when we start leveraging this technology in a broader way. Now, I think sometimes there is a little bit of misnomer, because there's a lot of focus on ethics now, perhaps in the last, I would say 3, 4, maybe 5 years at the most. And so people will start to pay attention, like, well, now we're using this technology so much, but it really has been around and been leveraged in ways for many years, even in simple use cases like our preferences that we see on Netflix or maybe in an online store that we would go to. Those recommendations that are being made started off, probably some rules-based, but then transitioned to looking at tons of data that we provide in a number of ways to help drive what we see and perhaps what gets recommended to you. And that's some of the simple use cases, but then we know now technology and AI is on our phones. It's in my refrigerator and my new microwave. My microwave goes off and my TV bangs, and we get notifications all over the place, right? And so we're starting to see that these use cases increase. But I think the bigger problem or the bigger concern for us, not really problem, concern, and the thing to be aware of, and that we're challenging businesses and organizations to pay attention to, are where there are concerns or implications. One, from the perspective of our data, the data that's being used, and that makes the basis for how decisions are being made. But then just, is there inclusion and who's involved in the process? And that becomes more important when we start talking about high stakes decisions or things that are really going to affect individuals' livelihoods, like, decisions about the kind of care that they get at, medical facilities, or even, what happens in terms of their case when they're being considered for parole, right? And looking at cases of recidivism. All of those things are implications that, AI is now playing a part in, right? In making decisions or providing input to. And those are concerns where there's a potential for us to get that wrong. And when we think about our community, in particular, Black and Brown, there's a whole historical context that has to be paid attention to that oftentimes isn't being considered, right? Even with the foundations of the data that we use and how that comes into play, right? There is, in some ways, no ground truth, in my opinion, because our data is flawed based on so many things that have been institutionalized, systematized, right? That comes into the picture. And without folks like us, in the room, helping to drive decisions, to evaluate the ways in which we're using technology, then there's a huge risk that this is going to have a much bigger impact and continue to leave people like us behind. And so, this conversation around ethics, the importance and value of responsible AI is really ensuring that technology is inclusive, and the way in which it's being applied and used isn't going to perpetuate bias, continue to disadvantage people that have been advantaged, and really have the impact of harm. So it takes people like myself and others who are really digging into these use cases and challenging us to think differently about how we approach leveraging the technology, and then what we do and who's involved. And who's involved plays a huge part in what the outcome can be and how much we benefit from it. But they're great. There's great benefit, right? There's a lot that's being done and used, a lot of ways in which AI is solving problems that previously wasn't available to us or weren't able. These were considered impossible, and we want to see those use cases be brought to bear. We want to see the technology used in that way, but I think we need to bring a great bit of intentionality into how we approach the problems we solve, who's engaged, what data we use, when we use the data, how we evaluate the outcomes, what improvements we make, and then ultimately who ends up leveraging and benefiting from it.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there, but hopefully that give folks a good sort of context for the conversation around ethics.
Yeah, great primer. And Todd, I wanted to give you a little bit of space too, if you had anything to add from your perspective. I know that being a Black or brown person in kind of the tech industry and like getting your hands dirty and your feet wet with AI and ML technology could have been a lonely road, or maybe there's some experiences to add to kind of the 100 level understanding of folks that are joining us on the call today. So I'll make some space for you if you've got any extra stuff to add to that first question.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just keep it short, right? I mean, to level set and echo what some of the things that were already stated as far as the understanding of AI ML, I would say that there's two different things that are separate, although one is a subset of the other. And artificial intelligence is more around teaching machines how to perform human tasks, right? Mm-hmm. And to what extent, to what level, is there going to be some type of perception on behalf of the machines? Do we get to a point where they actually have feelings and et cetera? So that's more of the AI side of the house, but it was teed up great from the definition. It's one that I regularly give around machine learning, is that it's really nothing more than the algorithmic discovery of patterns in data. So the data is of the utmost importance. You'll probably hear us talk about data a lot through the rest of this talk here today, but that's kind of level setting the playing field as far as the understanding of AI, ML, and where we're going to come into it with a lot of these questions later on.
Yeah, thank you for that. You mentioned data, which is an interesting thing in that it surpassed, I guess, last year oil as the most valuable resource on planet Earth, right? So Diya, coming back to you about the piece that you think government and policy should be playing to ensure that what we're doing with the technology and what we're doing with the data is implemented in a way that's fair and equitable across the spectrum for all people, both now kind of in this generation, but then also in the next generation, that's going to impact our children and the generations to come. Any thoughts on that particular role that you think government and policy should be playing in order to start to craft and shape that?
Yeah, so I would say that, just to take a step back, we all have a part to play, right? And it's not just government and policy, academia, public and private industry, right? And us as citizens, users, consumers, I think have a part to play in ensuring that there are standards that are being applied and used with regards to the technology. I mean, our part as individuals, one is having, an awareness. And I think many of us don't. And we use so much of technology, and even in the context of data, give our data up so willingly without recognizing it when we use social media and different systems online, right? And we sign or we check the box for, I agree to those terms that we never even read, right? A lot of that, offers up our information and our data in ways that then gets used in a number of algorithms or driving decisions. So we all have a part, one, in having some understanding as consumers, but then holding folks like our legislators accountable to actually thinking about and putting appropriate rules and legislation in place that actually govern how technology is being used. Now, I know oftentimes people hear governance and they think about like policies to ensure that we're just applying the right regulatory or legal compliance, but we're talking about, one, having checks and balances in place, and established norms that even companies would have to ensure that they're meeting objectives and expectations and being responsible in the way that they leverage it. We can't, of course, forget the role that government and agency has to play in really providing the guardrails, right? To make sure that this doesn't get in the hands of rogue or actors or bad actors and isn't used in inappropriate ways, to make sure that there isn't malicious use and to ensure things like people's privacy isn't violated and that data usage is understood and again, that the appropriate sort of controls are being in place to minimize harm. So government absolutely has a place. Standards bodies have a place. Companies take some responsibility in the way they're building, implementing, and deploying. And then we too have a responsibility in this story.
Yeah, thanks for that response. And I saw a question come in from Coloma about does the bias of those who are setting up these AI and ML plays factor into the outcome? And I would say absolutely, but I saw Todd pop in and I want to pass the popcorn to you to give some context and some background into why that might be a resounding yes when it comes to the creator's bias actually coming into play when that product gets out into the ecosystem or out into the wild.
Absolutely. Great question. And the reason why I want to jump in there is because it plays kind of along with the key theme that we're discussing here today, which has to do with bias and fairness. And I would say that the status quo within the industry, hands down, is that both of those are of major concern at all levels across all industries as it pertains to AI ML. So the creators, regardless of where they're working, what function it is, the reoccurring theme of what we're seeing is, to your point, the individual or the team bias, it continues to creep into the machine learning model building process, which, as we know, all begins with the data, right? And there's a lot of different examples that are out there that we can glean from. You see this with facial recognition systems where they have trouble picking up certain skin tones and thus preventing the same level of authentication capability than someone with a contrasting skin tone, right? Inclusion. That's kind of an example that plays there. We've also seen this, with more sensitive topics that are out there recently within social media companies. You see popular recommender systems that they'll show a video of Black males, and after it's watched, it's highlighted and then recommended to the user to watch other videos on primates, right? Is this still happening in today's day and age? It absolutely is. That's the reality of these creators of these machine learning models. And as uncomfortable as it may be to speak about this, it's the reality. It's the status quo, and things like this certainly are still happening. So there's a level of responsibility that comes with public-facing machine learning-enabled offerings that are out there. And I think the responsibility in itself it's a challenge across the system. So again, this goes back to the individual, and we have to work backwards from the why, right? The why in terms of this data misclassification, where it's happening, how the bias is creeping in, how the data is being inaccurately labeled, even if it's with unintended discrimination, it's still happening. And there's a lot of technical aspects that I can get into. We'll keep it short here for right now. But I think when you architect, when you put the right mechanisms in place around how the data is being architected and audited and checked and managed, it could be with explainability tools that are augmenting what the model is actually doing. One of the most fundamental reasons that this is happening in my eyes is because of lack of diversity, because of a lack of inclusion, because of the associated training with the individuals that are behind these processes that are creating these. So essentially decoding our own unconscious biases, which are readily identifiable or naturally identifiable in most of us, is something that we all need to work on as a society, right? So we have to confront our own biases in order to properly mitigate them. Otherwise, these things will continue to happen. And there's a lot of exercises to do, questions to ask. What is being biased? How do I know if I'm biased? Am I racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever? How do I get rid of my biases? And I think that, with these questions, exploring the past, the right training materials, seeking out the answers here, we'll be able to understand the differences between prejudice, discrimination, and what that looks like in real life, right? And to be honest, I'm seeing these trainings and these levels of education and enablement more and more with the different teams that I work with, different companies across all industries. And lastly, I'd say that it's safe to say, machine learning has been infused in all aspects of our life, right? Both in our personal and professional life. It will continue to be infused in the same manner. Therefore, I expect to, unfortunately, continue to see these kind of ethical challenges. And then, as you put it earlier with the question of those setting up the AI, ML play into the outcome that's out there. So we'll expect to see that, and it's really on us to change that.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Well, let me just jump in for 1 minute, because I also want to say that there's almost no system that is created that isn't infused with some level of bias by the creator, right? We create things with the intent and purpose for it to meet our objective or need. And so almost any technology or anything that is created is infused with the perception at some level, or the opinion or the desires of the individual that created it. And of course, when we start again looking at this from the perspective of artificial intelligence, well, because of the decisions that are being now made leveraging this makes it an even more a considerable risk. Todd mentioned something about us, in terms of individuals having bias. And it's true, right? All of us have bias at some level. And part of the solution, of course, is understanding and being educated, as he mentioned, to our biases and where those things occur. And then the other piece of that solution is also, or another part of the solution is having diversity at the table, because it's easy for us to build a system that meets the needs of or people that look like us, because we have that perspective. And so my lens, my lived experience is going to inform what I see and how I interpret what I'm looking at. Now, some of us are trained and have done some extra work. And so maybe we'll look at this a little different and consider the perspective of someone else. And that often happens with people from marginalized communities. But when you think about who's often sitting at the table, right? Who is behind the decisions that are being made around our technology, and then where, who's actually training our models and collecting our data and annotating the data. It's not us. And so there is a perspective, there is a lived experience then that gets that is not included or factored in, and perhaps even not paid attention to when we start evaluating the results. And that's why we could have a system go into production and start being used by individuals and not realize that we missed the mark, or that someone didn't realize that it was tagging folks inappropriately. They tested, there was testing done, right? But nobody considered that particular use case or didn't think to look in this particular corner. And so we have to look beyond that. And having a diverse team means that they're going to look at and consider, other use cases or scenario. There's less likelihood to have sort of common thoughts around certain things. And then we'll question and challenge, in ways to uncover where there might be other areas that we didn't consider. That's why the diversity picture is important. But we all have biases and they show up in different ways. And that was the point to make. And so it's important for us to understand that. And then like, how do we interrupt it? How are we intentional, right? And part of the ethics sort of solution is the intentionality that we bring to evaluating our use cases and the data and the outcomes. Because if we're intentional, then we can interrupt the bias, right? Then we can put the right measures in place to minimize its impact. Then we can look around corners and understand where there might be people, groups that are not being considered and actually consider them, right? And we're totally, it's all in the realm of possibility. It just takes very intentional systems and structures put in place in order to do so.
Amen. I know our two guests have said a bunch. I hope y'all are you're picking up what they're putting down so far. We're at like the midway point. Definitely a fascinating like on-ramp into some of these topics for folks that are new to them. But maybe to take it one step further, to come back to you, Diya, it seems like we've innovated really, really quickly so that some of these technologies are kind of like out there and not perfected. What would you say in terms of the consequences, both to like the society and even to the economy, for us not factoring in kind of ethics and governance into what we are putting out at such a fast clip? Give us a sense of like why those things are important. And maybe they don't make as much money, you know, out in corporate America, because you can get people to pay for things that maybe are 70, 80% done, but not all the way kind of tested and made, you know, feasible for every single population and demographic. But give us a sense from a societal perspective and then from an economic perspective, why we should set our intention to actually, you know, innovate in a balanced way that takes ethics and governance into consideration.
Yeah, right. So we've already been talking a little bit about some of the societal impact, right? One of the things that I often say is that we want technology being done for us, right? And not being done to us. And the whole implication there is that we end up leveraging technologies in ways that actually have harm or impact, right? That's the done to us, rather than being able to benefit from technology and its inefficiencies and the ways in which it helps us to scale and does things faster and even sometimes makes some better decisions, right? That's being done for us. So we've already been talking about some of those implications, right? Todd was just giving us an example of, you know, being and providing recommendations that might have been inappropriate and mislabeled. Someone I was talking to the other day told me that they were using some facial recognition technology and, you know, ended up scanning pictures of their child in order to look at something on Pinterest, and just was playing around a little bit. And they were miscalculated or misrecognized, I guess the word to say. And some of the suggestions came up were not, you know, were not flattering. And so those things, like from a societal perspective, I mean, you have a kid that's doing that, you know, what does that say to their self-esteem or self-esteem, or, you know, how might that make people feel? It goes beyond that to some very severe cases like we were talking about before, where decisions that have an impact on people's livelihoods, the kind of services they get, the kind of health care that's being provided in certain regions, and even, you know, whether or not they are allowed and released out of prison or jail. I mean, those are some severe cases, or in the case of some others where they are mistakenly identified and end up getting arrested, right, and put in jail, but it wasn't them. Now, you know, those economic consequences, I think, are really on the side of where this becomes an area where people don't trust the technology. And that mistrust is not just for the organization that deployed it or made it or used it, but that begins to be a mistrust of technology as a whole, or the technology as a whole, and has an implication to the ways in which we get to benefit from it. right? And we have some great use cases where, image recognition is being used to help capture individuals and bring people out of sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, and actually being used in ways to help us identify people and then get them out of a sex trade ring, right? That's a great use case. Or where AI is being used in order to actually combat carbon emissions. It's a great use case. We want it to be leveraged in that way. And so we don't want the mistrust, the lack of confidence that consumers and people societally will have in the technology. And of course, when we don't trust something, right, then there is going to be an increased fear, and then people aren't going to buy and spend, right? And so that will have an impact. Now, if we want to go even beyond that, at some point we're going to have regulation in place, and there are considerations being made for regulation right here in the U.S. and in other regions, Canada, Australia, Singapore all have principles that they defined around responsible or ethical use. And so they're starting to put in legislation that will actually be, mandated and control how companies get to use the technology. And so at some point, that's also going to have a financial impact to an organization that uses it in a way and then finds that they discriminated against or had a harmful impact. And let me just say this, we're talking about some very, I said high risk use cases, and even some of these are on the lower end of risk, because we also know in government, artificial intelligence is driving, some of our weaponry and machinery. And that's a whole nother sort of area of concern and a risk that people are looking at as well, right? But all of that, I guess, has to be sort of put in the context of, where there is not control and governance, right? That's going to increase our lack of trust, increase the fear that people have, and then ultimately have an impact on our ability to be able to leverage the technology in ways that really does provide good. And those are the ones that we want. I remember Todd saying at the beginning, he's a technologist. I'm a technologist too, right? And so I'm one of those people that say, I want us to be able to leverage and use the technology. There are proponents that will say we shouldn't use this at all and we need to get rid of it, like throw it away. I'm not saying that, because we actually have seen opportunities where it's made a huge impactful difference. And yes, it can help people build more products, and companies are gaining efficiencies, but I'm talking about like actual societal change that can happen when we talk about leveraging it for good. But again, I think it takes intentionality. We could very well shift how people look at credit risk ratings and things like that, right? And who gets offered services and has the ability to get financing by shifting factors in the way that we weight them for specific demographics. That's making a shift and an adjustment for people, right, that has previously been disadvantaged to give them advantage. Those are things that the technology can do when we start to look at it that way and understand where bias has been, and start to reweight and factor for bias, and people have put in intentional steps in order to actually, again, give advantage to where there was disadvantage, or to right the wrongs, or to shift the tide. And I think that that's possible. We just need more people thinking about it, more people understanding the historical context, more people looking at and evaluating the data, more of us at the table, right, to help influence those decisions. And that's not an easy sort of solution, but it's all things that are in the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I appreciate that response, and want to also state that I didn't, put it at the very top of this call, but I think both Todd and Diya touched on it. Agency as human beings and like as parents and as community members is something that we're hoping this series of community conversations can give to the students and the community members that are going to be part of these calls. I feel like sometimes when you step out the door, you feel like the tech is happening to you, and you're like just moving about as a product that a bunch of companies are taking data off of without too much say about what's happening with that data, or how you're able to impact the world as an individual. So quick poll, just currently where folks are sitting, if you want to pop into the chat and say, I feel like tech is happening to me, or I am happening to tech, as a gauge for how comfortable you feel being able to like have agency in today's world. I know for myself, I feel it's like a 50-50 coin flip. Some days I feel like tech is dictating too much to me, and then other days I feel like I got a handle on this. So feel free to say tech is happening to me, or I am happening to tech, if you feel like you're on top of things, just as a way to throw some engagement in there from the folks that are listening. So
I like the responses, right? Like overwhelmingly happening to me, right? It is like that sometimes. And listen, we're in the industry, right? We're dealing with this stuff every day, and you're like, okay, Siri and Google, shut up. Like, don't answer, don't get involved, right? But there are, and you talked about like how our data gets used and where that's coming from and what we yield and give over in ways. And I am just as guilty as probably everybody else on the call, wanting to get to the data or listen, it happens with articles now, right? You go to a site, you do a search, you pop up, you click the link to go to the article, and it says, and it pops up an alert. This was as a result of GDPR, but now they have pop-up alerts, and it says, I accept the cookies, or manage my cookie preferences, or I don't accept at all. What do you click? I accept all, because I want to get to the article, right? So you don't even know what you just gave away, right? And that's a simple use case, but we do it all the time. Or we go to a website or some social media platform, and we just click check the box to the terms and conditions, and we never even click on the link to read what's in there.
Yeah.
And those are one of those done to me kind of scenarios, right? Because I don't know what they're doing now. I mean, I do, because I look at some of that stuff, but most of us don't. We don't. We click sites all the time. We don't read the terms. We just figure, it's okay. But we give up our data, as Todd was describing, and how valuable that has become. We give it up. And it's great in some cases, right? Because I think about, like, I have a medical condition. And so it is great that my data is now accessible online, and that at any chance I go to another doctor, I could pull the data up and share that with them, right? Those are one of those use cases where it's like, it's wonderful that we get to share our data so easily, and it's online and accessible. But every bit of online accessibility that data that we provide is another opportunity for our data to be used in ways sometimes that we just don't understand. And some of those have implications that we haven't paid enough attention to, or we really don't understand what they are. And in some cases, those can be huge, even filtering what we see and how we consume the world. It is all in some ways being curated for us, right? Like, not even with our awareness or intention, it is curated for us, and we haven't done it, right? And so it filters what you get to see and what you consume and how much of that you get without your control, right? And I'm taking it on a whole nother level, but those are some of the ethical considerations as well.
Yeah. So I feel like at this point, we've given the primer, we've given some of like the overarching issues, and
gone deep. We've done.
What I wanted to do was carve out that there's a way that especially communities of color have taken lemon over the years and made lemonade out of it. So I wanted to shift a little bit and talk about like the opportunity and some of the cool stuff, Todd and Diya, that you've been able to do for the community, in the community, as it pertains to like what we're talking about right now. So Todd, I'm gonna kick this one to you. In terms of like barriers to entry that you've been able to move out of the way, or like the leveling of the playing fields that we talk about in this particular industry, and giving access and opportunity to communities. What are some takeaways, from your personal story or for some of the work that you've done that you are proud of and that you think other folks who are tuned into this, both the students and the actual community, can learn from?
So we are getting personal here. This is great because it helps align other individuals with, hey, this is something that is part of their story. There's a commonality there. I think that'll end up being the biggest takeaway here. And the first off, I'd say it's just character, right? So who are you as an individual? What's your character? I talk a lot at different conferences, right? Sometimes it's with startups and incubators and accelerators and fireside chats. Sometimes it's dev tech conference. But when I do show up, I make sure that the makeup of the panel is diverse because it's that inclusive, underrepresented perspective that I think will be most compelling out there for the rest of the industry. And that's how I prioritize my involvement in speaking events as well, versus a role of just having, all male, certain ethnicity that I'm adding some color commentation to, right? So with that, I will respectfully request them to make the panel more diverse at times. And that kind of speaks to your character, our character as our community, as we alluded to earlier about how important it is to have that diversity of thought that's out there. So some of the cool things that I've been involved with are being able to work with different schools and to give back. I think it was such a big part of my transition into a successful career, into machine learning, into a very positive trajectory. So me giving back to schools, to students, recognizing where they're currently at in their life, telling my personal story has boded very well for me. One example is Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy, or IMSA for short. Their academy is really all about igniting and nurturing creative, ethical, scientific minds. So that resonates with me, right? They're one of the top high schools in the nation for the United States. And I volunteer office hours that are out there today to kind of give back to them. So as part of their curriculum, I can help kind of shape that, given my experiences, things that I've worked on, different trends, what are newer technologies, and then answer questions, given my experience, around linear classification or logistic regression, decision trees, neural networks, clustering, whatever it might be, auto encoders, right? So I can show up to these office hours and answer some questions that will put my perspective and put it into context for them, and maybe a different way that's being taught in the curriculum today. I've been working with universities as well. I was at the University of Northwestern, worked with their graduate program. They have a Master's of Artificial Intelligence, and we did a little bit of hands-on building with AI and kind of teaching them the different aspects of artificial learning from a practical perspective. So tying those dots, connecting the dots from a technology perspective is always very, very cool as well. But to be honest with you, I'd say that one of the most gratifying aspects of me giving back to the community is speaking back home, right? Speaking in Chicago. I grew up in the south side of Chicago, speaking at Hispanic schools in impoverished neighborhoods. Always looking for, of course, that one person where I can tell that the connection was made and to give back, because I was once that student. I was once in the back of the classroom trying to work on my work, and a lot of speakers weren't resonating until that one group that showed up, the individuals that showed up that looked like me, that spoke like me, that came from the same neighborhood or the same background, and to see them as a success, to hear there was a lot of credibility in my eyes. So I know that if I can just show up, that's making a big enough impact in itself. And then again, of course, sharing the personal story, which really resonates given the commonalities between the individuals in these neighborhoods and myself, being just 5, 10, maybe now 15 years ahead of where they're at, depending on where they're at in their studies right now. But I think that that's the ripple effect in the community. Not only is it gratifying, I think the ripple effect really begins with that drop in the water, or that mic drop. it's achievable, showing them that they can do it, right? And one of my mentors, who's a big activist in the city of Chicago, always says, if you can see it, you can be it.
Mhm.
And that's never rung so true in my eyes, at least, as far as different quotes that are out there of famous people. I just quote my mentor and always tell my mentees about the same thing and tell them the same stories, because once you understand mentally that it is achievable, that this can be you, regardless of where you come from or your circumstances, then that's when that mental barrier is knocked down, and that's when you're able to take action, right? And then there's a whole group of people and teams and individuals and resources that are there for the recruitment of the individuals that are taking action, that are determined to be successful and do right by their community and add that diversity of thought. And then the next ripple, it goes on and on, right? There's teams, individuals, resources for the retention of these individuals. And there's been a lot of different projects that we've been involved in. Brandon, you and I have worked a lot as well in the past with some of the technologies that we've put together that were ultimately very complex, and you just could not organically, in one role out of college, gain those experiences, especially as it pertains to reinforcement learning, whether it's live streaming, whether it's working with, these algorithms, and jumping into the weeds, the architectures, the training, the retraining. I mean, there's so many different things, and then being able to create a service on the back end and help. And, there's a lot more to elaborate on in there in detail, but working with other individuals and networking is very important as well. So being a part of your network and you're a part of my network, and the things that we're both involved in, we can bring those and advocate in the different communities and touch those different individuals that at that time and moment in their life need it. So again, this kind of goes back to some of the cool things and lowering the barrier to entry, and just taking all the knowledge and experiences and making it a gratifying experience to give back to them.
Yeah, I remember, Todd, you were on the East Coast. This was probably 2 years ago, like right before COVID. And I did see somebody from Street Code Academy just joined here in East Palo Alto. We did a deep racer kind of AI machine learning on a race car. And it had to like learn how to follow the white stripe and the orange stripe all around the track that we had set up. I think we were on campus at like Facebook around the corner. They gave us some space and we did it with, there's some 6, 7, 8-year-old kids all the way up to like 60, 70-year-old, elders that were there to be able to just have a community experience together, to enjoy one another, but then also to learn something cool at the same time. So, that's one example of something in person, probably one of the last things I did in person before lockdown happened. That had to do with reinforcement learning. I never heard an 8-year-old say supervised learning in my whole life. So it was a cool thing to be able to start to plant those seeds. And like you say, Todd, for them to be able to see it so that one day they could actually be it. I feel like that's what it's all about. So Diya, I want to also pass you that question because I know you're really active in the community there on the East Coast. Any examples of things you're especially proud of that you've been able to put your hands to along the lines of what we're talking about in like the AI and ML space, or within ethics, or within?
Yeah. I love what the examples that Todd was giving. One of the things that I talk a lot about is exposure, and that really being the key for young people or people in general, right? Just being exposed. And there is a study that talks about how exposure is really the most important thing, not the people that but it's a predictor to success. And I can say from my own personal life, right? It was my exposure to technology in the 3rd grade that changed and shifted my trajectory, because I didn't live in an environment and wasn't from a family where we had, technologists or people in computers, right? And actually what is acceptable, or what was acceptable for women, was for you to be what? A homemaker, a teacher, or maybe a nurse, right? And so that's what I had in my family. We had a bunch of teachers. We had some folks that stayed at home, some of which not by choice. And then my aunt was a nurse. So we didn't have folks that would have opened up a world for technology for me. But in the third grade, I received a computer for having the highest reading math scores in our school. And that changed my life. And I've never done anything else. I said at third grade that I was going to be a computer engineer. And I've been working in computers ever since. That was what exposure did for me. Right. And it's the very thing that Todd is talking about. And you all are describing those experiences that we get to expose people and elevate their thinking. You never rise. You only rise to the level for which you've been exposed. If you've never been exposed to it, you can't rise to that. Right. And so we actually have to take on, and those are, I think, my greatest, successes, or the things that I appreciate most, is those opportunities to expose young people in particular, and oftentimes women and people of color to technology. So I'm involved in Tech Girls. It's actually one of the organizations I brought to our company to sponsor, because in addition to like providing a Women in Tech conference, all of the proceeds from that go to actually training middle school girls in technology, right? And we provide all of the technology training for free, and people volunteer their time, but they give them all the tools, and it can be anywhere from Alexa skills to AI to regular basic programming to understanding data, right? It's across the board, and all the classes are provided. The content and what they are is just a matter of bringing it to the students, right? Getting the students there. On a professional level, I work with, Data Ethics for All, which is, about us looking at and considering, the implications and what do we do to educate society, as well as our youth, and how do we train them? And they have training programs and STEM tutoring and that sort of thing. I participate on an annual basis in a number of like Young in AI or Women in AI hackathons, where we actually bring teens into a group and we provide mentors for a series of days, or even earlier this year over the summer. And we actually expose them, and we give them an opportunity to consider real world problems that they potentially can change. And then the other one that I would say I'm particularly proud of, there are probably a number of others I could mention, but as I belong to and I'm a part of an organization called Changing Destinations, Journeys to Excellence. And it's a not-for-profit that really is focused on how do we create global citizens for our youth. And we do that by leveraging the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And across those, right, there is a space for technology. And how do we bring technology not only to our young people and make them aware of the possibility there, but how do then we leverage the technology to solve some of the problems that we confront, or that are confronting us and this nation and around the world? And understanding that our decisions and our choices, even as children or young people, have an impact on the global community. And so what does that look like? And so that's one of, again, like one of my favorite things I do, but I mean, it's really just a joy to be able to introduce and expose people to a world of opportunity, and hopefully open their eyes to something that could be a future for them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And this has been, like, up to this point, like, we're about an hour in, such a beautiful conversation. I'm hoping that people have learned a good amount about kind of the field of ethics and the considerations of AI and ML technology, a little bit about our community and culture, and then like just the format in that we're kind of doing this together. We've got community members lending their expertise. We've got community members that are listening. I'm hoping that as we move forward, that the university setting and that the corporate America setting will allow kind of more situations and circumstances like this, so that the interfaces between these different entities in our society will be able to culturally cross barriers and like come to better understanding, so that we can function a little bit better than we function today. So what I'll do at this point, I know it's right past 5 o'clock. I wanted to ask folks if they had any questions out there in the audience. I'm gonna just say a big thank you to our special guests, Todd and Diya. If y'all want to throw some snaps or claps or heart emojis in your little windows there, feel free to. And I'm going to actually stop sharing and maybe go on camera for everybody. If you want to just come off and put your video up. If you got questions or things that you would want to ask Todd and Diya or any other community directly, I wanted to keep maybe the next 10 or 15 minutes for y'all and then get you out of here. I see one in the chat from On already about books or must reads or resources or podcasts and things like that. So Diya and Todd, you want to offer up some suggestions about good reading or good listening for any other folks that are in the audience at this point? I can kick it to you first, maybe Diya, and then Todd, or if you just want to throw some stuff in the chat, we'll make sure we capture it all and then send out a summary or recap after.
Yeah, there are probably a ton of books. I'm probably going to say her name wrong, and I probably should get it right by now. Susanna Zubinoff, and she has a book called Surveillance Capitalism. It talks about, how our data is being leveraged and how we are the sort of new data and the data economy and what that looks like. And then just the risk behind that. You have Ruha Benjamin with Captivating Technology, which is good. And I'm probably, missing a number of others, but I think those two are some really great ones. There are some others that that I could probably share offline. I read and I look at a number of things because, again, I was saying that I like to also kind of check in and look at the kind of historical context for things. So because ethics is a multidisciplinary problem, you kind of have to look at social science and have an understanding of that and look at some things historically and really start to put those things together to understand, perspective and where they're coming from. A really, really great book. And I know I've shared this with you before, and I just love it. Oh, now I'm gonna forget the name of it. It's just about to say it. Oh, come back to me. I'm gonna remember in my head. I was just about to say the name of the book, but it's one that kind of helps me with getting historical context and
it'll come. I know it's one of those things where as soon as you come off, it'll strike you. So.
Go to Todd. Todd, you take it from here, and I'm gonna come up with the name. Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about a lot of different books. So I want to take a different angle to answer this question because it was back in 2018, which wasn't too long ago, when I was involved in working in stealth for one of the largest cloud companies out there. It was a group of us, very core group, and we turned this internal PRFAQ, this internal project, into a public-facing service that was quickly adopted by tens of thousands of aspiring machine learning developers, and that ultimately ended up being 100% open source down the line. It had to do with reinforcement learning. I was able to evangelize this technology all across the world in front of different cultures, from India to Australia to different conferences. And what I found is that during my contributions to this core group, I've worked with some of the principal data scientists within the industry. And what I wanted to say is that Archive is a great place to go to look at the different types of research papers that are out there that are being written, fascinating topics, and they get into the problem statement within the industry, what's been tested to date, and then their approach to what it is that they're developing. So for me, working with data scientists, understanding how, some of them have gotten their PhDs and the types of research that they had to do and to write, I find that pretty fascinating myself, is to go through archive.org and to take a look at the different types of research papers that are being written and what teams and individuals are experimenting with from a technology perspective. So that's kind of how I stay up to date with a lot of the status quo today.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, I appreciate the those initial thoughts. And Diya, if you want to put the book in the chat, if you remember it.
Yeah, it's Rochester, the Black Tax. The cost of
on
being Black.
Rochester.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of good historical context there, and it helps to understand sort of underpinning of some of the data and things that occur. And that was one that that is super, it was tremendously useful for me, and maybe of great interest for folks to hear.
Sean Rochester, he's a great speaker. If you YouTube search Sean
Phenomenal,
Rochester,
yeah.
a bunch of stuff. I think he gave a great talk at Google a couple years back. He's got a couple of different books that he's put out there, but yeah, real sharp brother. So coming your way, Carlos, I saw you come off video. Did you have a question for us?
I didn't. I was just trying to go on video, but I can come up with one. I think earlier in the conversation when things started. By the way, hi and thank you.
Oh,
It's after 8 over here in Michigan. Earlier we were talking about legislation and the government being responsible in corporations, and I was just thinking, are there any corporations that are being responsible or accountable currently? And when we talk about ethics, if we leave the government out of it, how do we get the corporations to be ethical and accountable to themselves?
that's an interesting question. So I would say to you that there are companies that will do the right things for the right reasons, but I think that is fewer of companies, and they actually need the motivation of government entities to be the stick, right? So this is the whole carrot and stick mentality, right? Some people are going to do the right things, and that's the carrot, and other people need the motivation of regulation to drive them to do the right things. And I think that you'll see, we see a mix of that when it comes to this topic. But I think the other thing is we as consumers help to drive some of that decision, because people will make a choice and won't buy from a company that is not being responsible, or don't buy from a company that doesn't align with your sort of values, right? And aren't doing things positively and having a positive impact in society. If we make more of those kinds of decisions, then that also has an implication on a company's bottom line, and then that will drive them to pay attention a little bit more. And so we're seeing a combination of that. Some of this movement around AI ethics and responsible AI is coming from people, right? It is the activists, folks in society that are saying, hey, this is an issue. We need to pay attention to it more, and you all need to wake up. And it is the folks that are crying out, in communities and raising, the awareness and calling companies out sometimes that is helping to force change. But I think that, there are institutions for sure, like some of ours that are very aligned to being more compliance driven, that need the motivation of government so that they can comply.
Thank you.
Yeah, if maybe I could add something very quickly onto that as it pertains that, Carlos, I think you're really onto something. It's super important, because there is and there always will be competing objectives between private sector companies and the different standards bodies that are out there. That's just how it will always be, right? And I think that AI policy itself, it's very interesting in that other governments are actually referencing each other, and they're doing a lot of discussions at these international forums, more so than you typically see when it comes to just general policy development. And these discussions are happening at the international level as well. And then you see governments essentially adopting different variations of these pieces of regulation and then formalizing it on their own. So that means every nation's pretty much almost aligned, but they have a slight difference. And what's good about this whole development of today and the status quo within the industry is that policymakers, they're getting more and more skilled in this area, right? That's a great thing. And they should be getting better and evolving, and they should continue to do this while at the same time iterating as new information becomes available, different perspectives and different ideas arise from these private sector tech companies. So I think the implication here is that an entire nation is really depending on the government's guidance. Now, with that being said, just as kind of a final thought, it's really important to also emphasize the latter part of your question as it pertains to private sector technical expertise from some of these top researchers that are out there, some of the cloud vendors or some of these big enterprises. I mean, both enterprises and startups alike across all verticals, they're really there to push the envelope and ask these policymakers the difficult questions, right? The very deeply technical questions. And I think it's because of this, we start to see that as an industry, we're able to evolve into more specific regulation down the line versus just traditional blanket regulation.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Todd. And hopefully, Carlos, that gives you some perspective on a couple different ways to answer that. But to me, like, I have 3 children. I've got that one kid where you tell them and they just do it. That's altruism, right reason. I got that other one that's like, I got a whole video games and like treats and carrots over them. And then you got it's like, so it's a perfect analogy maybe for what Diya and what Todd described. I don't know. Diya, maybe I'm missing the mark.
No, you're on. You're right on. You're right on.
No, I appreciate that. So thank you for doing all of community college and this first one. So this is great. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Maybe I see one question left in the chat, and before I ask it, I thought this would be fun to do to close us out. Put your vote in the chat for New York pizza or Chicago pizza to see who the winner will be. I'm curious to know who will win. So just put your preference.
I'll vote twice.
Here we go. And while we're doing that, the last question in that chat was about
Detroit pizza? I'm sorry.
I don't even know what that is. Carlos is gonna have to tell us. But before that, I'll ask a question about quantifying success. So like in reaching underrepresented populations, once you actually reach them and get them into the field, how do you retain them? Like, how do you keep them when racial barriers persist, maybe when culture is not there? Like, how do we get people in our communities to stay kind of in the field? I'll give it to Pia, then give it to Todd. This could totally be another hour conversation, but we'll try to wrap it in, 10 or 12 minutes.
Yeah, did you want me to start?
Yeah, Todd or Diya, you can kick us off.
Oh, okay, yeah. So this is, this is a very interesting question because I think that we have a couple of things at play in particular right now when with all that has happened with COVID, even what we consider, over the last year with the sort of racial unrest and I think a more open, understanding of where people might sit from their racial perspectives, I guess, as we could say. It's really interesting question because folks are really aware and acknowledging, that there are these challenges that exist, and in many cases, individuals are not willing to sit in environments where they're not being valued or paid attention to, and that's what companies are now talking about as the Great Resignation or the Great Reprioritization. We're deciding that we could go somewhere else, or we make a choice that it's not worth the investment that we're putting into companies and in environments when we're not being treated fairly. And so I think it's a very difficult question that I see companies really challenged with right now. Overall, I think it's investing in people, right? What are the right things to do to help help people stay is to, invest in them, incentivize them, provide opportunity where they actually feel valued, for the work that they contribute and what, they bring to the table. And then making pathways and opportunities for them to elevate or be, to grow in their careers in that particular organization. Why do people, stay? Because they're going to be compensated well. They feel like they're going to be valued, and they feel like there's opportunity for them to see their, achieve their future success in an organization. And if it's not there, then people will leave. And then I think for those of us like in the community, and what I'm saying by the community, those other Black and Brown that are in those organizations, that we get and have the challenge of being the support, right? That I am looking out for Todd, I'm looking out for Brandon. I am trying to, be there. I am the safe place that we can kind of go to have conversations when necessary, or even to commiserate about our our frustrations, but then find a way to get back up and go out there and do the work. I think that village, that community we get to be to one another is important to help people stay. But I think our companies have to do the work and really being inclusive. It's great when we bring them to the party. And this is the way that I just describe diversity. I heard it from someone else, so I can't take this as my own. Diversity and inclusion, right? Diversity is inviting everybody to the party, but inclusion is making sure they dance. And who wants to be the person that's holding up the wall when we're at a party and they got live music pumping? No, we all want to be able to dance. So organizations actually have to figure out a way, right, to create that such that we can be involved, contribute, and be valued for it. That's my answer there.
Yeah, thanks for the quick take there. And then Todd, this will be the last question, so we'll give the popcorn over to you and then move towards closing us out here.
I mean, I think it's very obvious as far as being able to reach the underrepresented population. There needs to be people, there needs to be a community, there needs to be resources. We all need to be elevating each other. And I think as someone who's went through the system where I've had certain touch points of groups like that. For example, at the University of Illinois at Chicago, there was a program called MERP, MERRP, Minority Engineering Recruitment and Retention Program. And the only difference was that they, instead of having a general library, they had their own floor. It was like 2 offices and an open room with like 3 computers and your own printer. But outside of the small amount of resources for minorities were the individuals that were in those 3 offices and how they would advocate for you. They would talk you through your career. So that's the retention program of it, developing those types of relationships. And Gina, great question, really appreciate it. I guess I never really thought about quantifying my personal level of success with the reach of the underrepresented community, because I've always felt like it's my duty. This is something that I have to do. I was a recipient of people giving to me. So in return, therefore, I must give back. And not only have I been doing that, but it's been a very gratifying part of my life, my career, my different experiences to give back in that manner. So yes. Hopefully that answers the question and encompasses the feel of community that we're all striving to not only create here, but to continue to maintain for the future generations.
Love that.
Yeah, that's like a mic droppable. That's a perfect place to leave the conversation. So I'll just pick it up and say thank you to each of you, our special guests, Diya and Todd, for kind of the subject matter expertise around the topic, but also kind of Pia for being the support bouncer, letting people in and out of the room, to Coloma and Carlos and Gina and Sarah and Mr. Mullins and Megan and Jordan, Patricia, Livia, Camille, and Jim and Will. We appreciate each of you for taking some time out to hang out with the community here and be a part of it. And then we'll have many more talks throughout the course of this series of community conversations about different elements of that world peace acronym that we talked about policy and ethics, AI, ML tech, culture, and the environment. So yeah, I will turn the music back up and just say Have a great rest of the week. Thank you everyone for coming through, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Next week we'll have another one. So stay tuned to the Instagram channel, and we'll give you all the details there.
Y'all are wrong for the Chicago pizza. I just want to say.
Chicago wins.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, see you, Diya.